Blackwater itself, in particular its CEO and founder, Eric Prince, has long-standing ties to the conservative movement, particularly on the Christian Coalition side, had been very generous with his campaign contributions over the years. He and his family contributed over $2 million to Republican candidates and the Republican Party.
Hey guys, I don't want to talk to you, okay? Thank you. I want to ask you some questions about your mental collusion. What happened there, sir?
Fallujah happened the last day of March. Within 24 or 48 hours after that, they're literally on the Hill meeting with some of the most powerful members of Congress who really were going to dictate what was going to happen to the company in terms of its funding. They went to John Warner, who was the chair of the Armed Services Committee on the Senate side. They went to Duncan Hunter, who was a congressman from San Diego, who was the chair of the Armed Services Committee on the House side. They met with Rick Santorum, who was chair of the Republican Senate Conference Committee, which is a very, very powerful post.
Contractors are among those who have been taken hostage. They've also suffered terribly, injuries and loss of life, the most horrific of which occurred on April 13th of this year, Madam President, when the bodies of 4 contractors were burned, mutilated, and hung from a bridge in Iraq. Should we step up and try and do something about that problem?
We will have to have very vigorous opposition to this amendment as it is presently drawn.
The Blackwater strategy worked very, very well. They went to Washington, they stopped any investigation from taking place, and at the end of the day, as a result of their action, they were able to protect their business. They went out and they retained former high-ranking government officials, Hofer Black, who was a high-ranking official at the Central Intelligence Agency, Joseph Schmidt, who was the Inspector General at the Pentagon, and undoubtedly, when you go out and you retain high-ranking officials like that, they certainly are helpful in attracting new business, pursuing new business, and getting new contracts. Within a year after the Fallujah incident, they had received over $200 million in new government contracts.
People in Washington who leave government and go to work in lucrative jobs for defense industries, they have connections. They have influence.
Business boomed. They just built a brand new headquarters. That's a big expansion. It's a rather big expansion, but it's needed. Certainly we've left room for growth. Like 8,000 square feet in the original building, 64,000 square feet here. The company says it can assemble hundreds of battle-ready men, a small private army at a moment's notice.
Teams of Blackwater independent contractors are deployed around the world.
Instead of mourning my son's death and the other 3 men, they go and they profiteer off of it. They were cutting every possible corner to make more money for them.
In Iraq, most of the men aren't getting the protection. Men over there working for Blackwater are still dying. The world really needs to know what's going on over there, and we need to stop it. There has to be accountability. Right now, they are literally getting away with murder.
Companies should not be permitted to operate in a war zone and not be held accountable.
من علم الثوب ضربا بالنوى ناديتها يا مها.
I was reading the Bible in Greek and Hebrew and studying those languages, and Hebrew sort of led naturally into Arabic. I was also interested in student loan repayment. I owed, upwards of $40,000 in student loans, which the Army promised to repay. The option available to me was to get a secret clearance and become an interrogator. And I agreed that this was pre-9/11. I didn't really expect I'd have to interrogate someone, or imagine if I did, it would have been in a conventional war where things would have been very different.
I found out in April of 2003 by a phone call. He said, well, the good news is, congratulations, you've been selected for promotion to Brigadier General. So I said, well, that's good news. What could possibly be the bad news? And he said, well, the bad news is your unit, you'll be commanding, is assisting the prisons experts with the restoration of prisons for all of Iraq. And they're already deployed. And I said, well, can I go? And there was just a second of silence on the other end of the telephone, and he said, do you want to go?
I received a telephone call from a Mr. Saleh. He said, can you help me? He said, the Americans took my money, and they hurt me very bad. And I just came from Abu Ghraib. He told me of one incident where, he was stripped nude, and they tied a rope to his penis with 7 or 8 other men, and then they would, these were American personnel, he's telling me, and they would push one man, and all of them would fall, and they'd be joking and laughing and mocking him. I would ask him, who was doing this to you, Mr. Saleh? And he would say, well, there were 2 types of people. One was dressed some type of military personnel wearing the army. And then the other type would be in civilian clothing. I go, what do you mean civilian clothing? He goes, like normal pants, like any normal pants and a normal shirt. So that's the first time when it struck me that there's another element being involved here in Abu Ghraib, another type of person there.
كان يوم أحد يوم الاثنين كانت حالة من الفوضى ومن الإجراءات الأمنية الشديدة. يوم الثلاثاء اللي هو يوم اعتقالي ذهبت إلى عملي، مو عملي أنا يعني كنا في موقع عمل في منطقة الحصوة، وأنا أعمل في مجال الكهرباء. تم نقلي إلى سجن أبو غريب في بداية عام 2004 باليوم الأول من الشهر الأول لعام 2004. كان أكو شخص مدني واقف بيتأمر يعني ياخذون أوامرهم من عنده اللي هم الشركات الأمنية. أدخلوني إلى الزنزانة، كبلوني، وتم خلع ملابسي بالقوة. يعني أسلوب من أساليبهم أنه الأمر تناسلي للرجل يلفون عليه حبل ويجروه هيك مثل عملية الخنق. شنو الغاية من عندها؟ شنو هاي الأمر الضربون إياها اللي أنا هسه حاليا حتى أطفال ما يصيرون عندي؟ شنو الداعي لأنه جيش يستعين بشركات أمنية مدنية للتحقيق مع معتقلين؟ بس أنا أقول لك هاي الشركتين مؤكدة، شركة تايتن، شركة CI.
When I saw the photographs for the first time, and I said to the commander of the Criminal Investigation Division who was showing it to me, I said, why are the translators around the prisoners? Why are the translators in the cell block? And he said, man, those aren't translators, those are khaki interrogators.
Khaki was hired by the Department of Interior out of a little town in Arizona called Cerro Vista, and they were hired to do database work. And that contract, which was sort of a blanket contract that allowed them to do a whole bunch of different things, was used to do interrogation in Abu Ghraib. So what ostensibly was a contract to do clerical work or IT work turned out to be getting information not from a computer but from human beings in a notorious prison in Iraq. At the time of the scandals in the spring of 2004, roughly 50% of the interrogators were private contractors.
This amendment, Madam President, attempts to address what I believe is a very legitimate and serious concern that has come to light in recent days with respect to the use of, or misuse of, contractors in the treatment of detainees